Imagine boarding a plane. Your mind focused on the important day ahead, a keynote speech that could change everything in your career. You have your ticket, your credentials, and the quiet confidence that comes from years of hard work. But before the engines even roar to life, you are told, you don't belong here. Dr. Alana Brooks, a powerful financial advisor with decades of experience, finds herself at the center of a heated confrontation that shakes an entire flight to its core. A senior flight attendant questions her right to her first-class seat, not because of a mistake, but because of fear and bias, a prejudice that feels invisible, yet hits like a thunderclap. What happens when dignity clashes with discrimination at 36,000 feet? How does quiet strength hold its ground against a storm of assumptions and systemic injustice? And when the eyes of hundreds on the plane and across the world are watching, who will rise and who will be pushed down? This is not just a story about a seat on a plane. It is a story about presence, courage, and the power to change the narrative. If you believe in standing up for what is right, even when it feels impossible, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel. Join us as we take you inside a flight that no one on board will ever forget. Ma'am, this seat isn't for you. The words were clean and sharp, like the edge of a glass shard. They hung in the air of the first-class cabin, slicing through the hum of quiet conversations and the soft clink of champagne flutes. Margaret Doyle, the senior flight attendant, stood in the aisle in her perfectly pressed Navy uniform, red lipstick flawless, posture straight enough to measure with a ruler. She didn't lower her voice. She didn't glance around to see who might hear. Every head within 3 rows turned toward the source of her declaration. Some passengers frowned in confusion. Others leaned in with subtle curiosity. A few exchanged glances that carried an unspoken sentiment. Someone had finally said what they had been thinking. But no one spoke aloud. Not yet. Dr. Alana Brooks had just placed her blazer neatly in the overhead bin and lowered herself into seat 2A. She adjusted her black leather shoes under the seat and rested a slim leather portfolio on her lap. She had done nothing more than take her assigned place, the one printed in bold letters on her boarding pass. She lifted her eyes slowly to meet Margaret's. "I'm sorry." What Margaret stepped closer, her arms folding across her chest. A polite smile stretched tight over something harder in her gaze. "This section is reserved for first-class passengers. If you're looking for coach, it's just beyond the curtain." She tilted her head toward the back of the plane as if she were giving directions to a storage closet. Without rushing, Alana reached into her shoulder bag and pulled out her boarding pass. "Seat 2A, she said evenly. "Alana Brooks." Margaret took it, glancing at it for less than a second before her expression shifted a mix of mild surprise and suspicion. "Interesting," she said under her breath. "We've had a few incidents lately. People sitting in seats they didn't pay for. Happens more than you think." From the aisle seat in 1A, a man with a mane of silver hair and a tailored navy suit lowered his coffee cup. His name was Harold Whitman, though Alana didn't know that yet. He was in his mid-50s, with the crisp demeanor of a man who expected the world to work around him. "If she's in 2A, Harold said, speaking to Margaret but locking his gaze on Alana, "I'd like to be moved. I don't feel comfortable falling asleep with my briefcase on the floor. Not after what happened to me a few months ago." Margaret nodded briskly. "Understood, Mr. Whitman. I'll see what I can arrange." Alana turned her head toward him. "And what exactly happened a few months ago?" Her voice wasn't sharp, but it was steady. "Flight to Phoenix." Harold replied without hesitation. "Young man sat next to me. Fell asleep. Woke up without my Rolex and my wallet. and he looked a lot like you." The words landed like a dull thud. Alana took a slow breath. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said, "but I'm not your memory, and I'm not your thief." Margaret stepped between them quickly. "All right, let's not escalate. Dr. Brooks, if you wouldn't mind moving back a few rows, we can de-escalate this situation." Alana blinked once, then again. "No," she said clearly. "I would mind. I paid for this seat. You have my boarding pass. My name is confirmed. I'm staying right here." Margaret's smile thinned. "I'm asking you to cooperate, ma'am." "And I'm asking you," Alana replied, "to treat me like a paying customer, not a suspect." The cabin fell into complete silence. Passengers shifted just enough to watch without appearing to watch. From seat 3B, a young woman with dark hair pulled into a bun adjusted her phone in her lap. Sophie Tran was a travel blogger with a loyal online following and an instinct for moments that mattered. She recognized this one. Her camera was rolling before she had time to think about it. Margaret turned toward the junior flight attendant standing near the galley. "Clara, please call for ground security to meet us at the gate." Clara Ruiz glanced down at the manifest in her hands, then back at Alana. "Ma'am," she said softly, "Dr. Brooks is listed right here in 2A. Seat confirmed. No upgrade. No mistake." Margaret didn't bother looking. "Thank you. Clara, I asked you to call security, not read the manifest." Her tone was clipped, professional, and ice cold. Alana turned toward the window. Outside, she could see the jet bridge still connected, ground crew moving about, the slow, deliberate preparations of a flight scheduled to leave in under 20 minutes. But inside, she could feel the weight of something heavier than the luggage in the overhead bins. She turned back to Margaret. "I'm not leaving this seat," she said, her voice level. "If you choose to remove me, you'll be doing it publicly, on record, and at the expense of your company's integrity." Margaret's jaw tightened. Harold sipped his coffee with a show of patience, muttering something about patterns and common sense. Clara's eyes darted between them. Sophie's phone kept recording. The jet bridge remained in place. The engines were silent. And for a long, tense moment, the only thing moving in the first-class cabin was the unspoken calculation happening in everyone's head, the question of how far this would go and who, in the end, would stand their ground. Margaret did not move. She stood in the narrow aisle like a locked gate. The curve of her lips said customer service, but her eyes said, "This is not up for debate." "Doctor." Alana Brooks kept her hands folded in her lap. She could feel every gaze in the cabin resting on her, weighing her, waiting to see if she would stand. She would not. Margaret exhaled through her nose. "Dr. Brooks," she began again, "this is not about you personally. It is about keeping the cabin comfortable for all our passengers." Alana tilted her head just slightly. Comfortable for whom Margaret's expression did not change. "For the people seated here, I am seated here," Alana said evenly, "in 1A. Harold Whitman shifted his weight. "It is about avoiding unnecessary problems," he said, leaning back in his seat as though that gave him the right to speak for the whole cabin. "I travel this route every month. I know when something feels off." Alana turned her gaze to him, her voice still low. "Do I feel off to you, Mr. Whitman, or do I just look familiar to someone you do not trust?" Harold's mouth tightened. "I am not accusing you. I am protecting myself." By assuming I am a threat, Margaret raised her hand slightly. "Let's keep this civil. Mr. Whitman has expressed discomfort. I am trying to address it without causing a scene." "You are causing a scene," Alana said softly. You are standing over me, telling me I do not belong where my boarding pass says I belong. That is the scene. From 3B. Sophie Tran angled her phone a little higher. She had been careful so far, her camera low in her lap. But now she wanted the exchange in full view. Her followers liked travel tips, yes, but they also valued truth. And truth was walking straight down the aisle of this aircraft, wearing a Navy uniform and a polished smile. Clara Ruiz stood near the galley door, eyes darting between the manifest in her hand and Margaret's stiff frame. She wanted to say something again, but the memory of her probation status hung heavy in her mind. One wrong step, and she could lose a job she had fought hard to get. Margaret turned toward Clara. "Call security," she said again. Clara hesitated. "Ma'am, if I may, the manifest is clear. Dr. Brooks is exactly where she should be." Margaret's voice lost the last of its warmth. "Clara, this is not your call. Please follow instructions." A tight silence filled the space between them. Alana watched Clara's throat move as she swallowed. The small tremor in her hand as she held the clipboard. She saw more than hesitation there. She saw conflict. Alana's mind flickered to 100 other rooms, 100 other moments where she had been here before. Not this exact cabin, not this exact uniform in front of her, but the posture, the implication, the subtle public stripping of credibility. She knew that well. She remembered a conference years ago where she had been told she could not enter the VIP lounge until her boss arrived, only for the staff to realize she was the keynote speaker. She remembered a boardroom in London where a senior partner had handed her his coat without looking up, assuming she was there to serve coffee. And now here, on a plane she had paid to fly in peace, the same story was unfolding with different scenery. She breathed once, slowly, through her nose. She would not raise her voice. She would not give anyone the excuse to call her agitated or hostile. Margaret leaned in a little closer, lowering her voice just enough for the front rows to hear but not the whole cabin. "If you cooperate now, Dr. Brooks, we can avoid delays for everyone." Alana met her eyes. "If I cooperate now, I tell every person watching that it is acceptable to be pushed out of your place because someone else is uncomfortable with your presence. That is a delay I'm not willing to cause." Harold sighed loudly. "A performance of frustration. This is ridiculous. We are going to be late because of this." Alana turned her head just enough to look at him. "We are already late, Mr. Whitman. The moment you decided my existence here was a problem, we were late." Sophie's phone captured every word. Her followers, seeing the feed in real time, began flooding her stream with comments. Some were angry. Some were stunned. Many were already tagging news outlets. Margaret straightened up. "All right, if you will not move voluntarily, I will have security escort you off the plane." Alana leaned back in her seat. "If you choose that, you do it publicly, on the record, and in front of multiple cameras." She let her eyes drift to Sophie briefly, then to a man in row 4 who was clearly recording too. "It will not be quiet." Margaret followed her gaze and saw more phones than she expected. Her lips pressed together. "In the galley." Clara's fingers hovered over the interphone. She did not dial. Not yet. Margaret stepped away, muttering into her earpiece. Harold drummed his fingers against his armrest. Sophie kept her camera steady. Alana's pulse was calm, steady, but her mind moved quickly. She thought of Marcus Reed, her chief of staff. waiting in Washington with briefing materials for the keynote she was set to deliver the next morning. She thought of the speech's title, the months of research behind it, the quiet certainty that every line mattered, and she thought of what would happen if she walked off this plane, how the headline would not be about her work, but about her removal. She felt the urge to call Marcus now, to tell him to prepare for disruption. But she stayed still. This was not yet the moment. From the corner of her eye, she saw Clara glance at her again. It was a small look, quick, almost apologetic. But there was something else there too, something like agreement. Margaret returned, her expression set. Security is on standby. Last chance to avoid this. Dr. Brooks. Alana looked up at her, unblinking. No. The word was quiet, final. The silence that followed was not the usual hush before departure. It was thick, electric, heavy with the sense that something irreversible had just been placed in motion. Margaret did not walk away this time. She stood rooted at the front of the aisle, her eyes scanning the cabin as though measuring who might side with her. A few passengers avoided her gaze, sinking back into their seats. Others kept watching openly, drawn in by the tension that had now taken over the entire first-class section. Harold Whitman leaned back in his seat, crossing one leg over the other, his voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "I have a right to feel safe," he said. "If something happens, everyone will wonder why we did not address it before takeoff." Alana Brooks turned toward him slowly. "If something happens," she said, "it will not be because I am sitting in the seat I paid for. It will be because someone decided my presence alone was reason enough to see me as a risk." Harold raised his eyebrows. "It is not about race. It is about patterns. You would not understand." Her voice was quiet, but each word was deliberate. "I understand that patterns can be made from fear, not facts. And fear, when left unchecked, becomes bias. Bias turns into action. That is how we get here." The cabin was still, except for the subtle sound of Sophie Tran's phone capturing every syllable. Her live feed was climbing past 2,000 viewers, the comments flooding in faster than she could read. Margaret cut in before Harold could reply. "Mr. Whitman, thank you for your input. Dr. Brooks, I am not questioning your ticket. I am responding to a situation that could cause discomfort for other passengers." Alana looked at her evenly. "The only discomfort here is being caused by you, not by me." Clara Ruiz stood by the galley door, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She had been told from day one to follow the lead of senior crew, to never undermine them in front of passengers. But she also knew what was printed on the manifest in her hands. She knew the policy, and this was not advertent. Margaret's voice carried the crisp tone of finality. "Clara, I need you to step into the galley and make that call to security." Clara hesitated again, her fingers tightening around the clipboard. She could feel Alana's eyes on her, not accusing, not pleading, but steady. That look was harder to ignore than any order. Sophie glanced up from her phone, making eye contact with Clara. It was a silent exchange, but it said everything. People were watching, not just here, but out there, far beyond the metal walls of this cabin. Margaret noticed the hesitation and stepped closer to Clara. "Now." Clara turned away, heading for the interphone. She picked up the receiver, but did not dial immediately. She could hear Margaret talking quietly to Harold, reassuring him, telling him this would be resolved shortly. Alana sat perfectly still, inside. Her thoughts moved quickly. Every instinct told her this was about more than a seat. She thought of the other passengers who might see this, the ones who might tell themselves it was none of their business. She thought of the time she herself had been a bystander, watching someone else's dignity be chipped away in public. She felt the weight of those moments pressing against her now. This time, she was the one in the center of it. From the back of first class, a man in row 4 leaned toward the aisle, clearly angling his phone for a better shot. Alana caught the movement in her peripheral vision. It was no longer just Sophie recording. At least 3 other phones were out now. Margaret returned from Harold's seat and stood over Alana again. "Security will meet us at the gate," she said, as if the decision had already been sealed. Alana's voice was even. "I am not moving." "Then you will be removed." Alana glanced at Sophie for the briefest second, then back to Margaret. "Then you will remove me in front of witnesses, in front of cameras, and in full view of your passengers. You will make this your story." Margaret's jaw tightened. She turned toward Clara. Status Clara replaced the receiver in its cradle. "I have not called yet." Margaret's head snapped toward her. "Why not?" Clara swallowed hard. "Because the manifest says Dr. Brooks is in the right seat. Because this is not a security issue." The air shifted. Margaret's shoulders stiffened, and a faint color rose in her cheeks. Harold spoke up again, clearly irritated. "Are we going to sit here all afternoon?" Alana did not look at him. She kept her focus on Margaret. "You can still choose to end this without making it worse." Margaret took a long breath, as if measuring her next move. Then she turned sharply and walked toward the cockpit. The cabin seemed to exhale with her departure. Sophie's viewers were now over 5,000, the comments flying in so fast they blurred together. Words like unbelievable, racial profiling, and stay strong scrolled across her screen. Clara took a small step toward Alana's seat. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. Alana nodded once. "I have been through worse," she said, "but not often on planes." Clara gave a faint, almost nervous smile, then stepped back into position near the galley. Alana looked out the window. The jet bridge was still connected. The ground crew was still moving around slowly, their neon vests bright against the gray concrete. It was hard to believe that just minutes ago this had been an ordinary boarding process. Now the air felt heavy, charged, as if the entire plane was holding its breath. She heard Harold mutter something under his breath, but she did not turn toward him. She had already given him more attention than he deserved. Margaret's voice came faintly from the front, speaking into her intercom. The words were low, clipped, but the tone was unmistakable control, or the attempt to keep it. Sophie checked her phone. The number of viewers was climbing again. She adjusted her seat, angled the camera slightly, and whispered almost to herself, "They are not going to like how this ends." Alana heard her but kept her eyes on the tarmac outside. She knew something was coming. She did not know exactly what, but she was certain of one thing: she would not be the one to back down. Margaret returned from the front of the cabin with a new edge in her step. Her shoes struck the carpet in clipped rhythms. Her chin lifted just high enough to signal she was back in control. The hum of the air system seemed louder now, filling the silence she brought with her. She stopped beside seat 2A. "Dr. Brooks," she said, her tone formal, "I am giving you one final opportunity to move to another seat before security boards this aircraft." Alana Brooks did not move. She sat with her back straight, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Her voice was calm when she answered. "No." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "If you refuse, you will be escorted off the plane." Alana's gaze was steady. "If I were someone else, Someone who looked different from me. Would you still be making this threat? Margaret's lips pressed together. She did not answer. From 1A, Harold Whitman let out a sharp exhale. You keep turning this into something it is not. It is about caution, not race. Alana finally turned to him. Caution rooted in fact keeps people safe. Caution rooted in fear only repeats injustice. Harold looked away, shifting in his seat. Margaret cut in quickly. This conversation is over. Clara, call for security. Clara Ruiz stood frozen near the galley, manifest still in hand. Ma'am, the paperwork shows Clara. Margaret interrupted sharply. Follow the order. Clara hesitated. Her fingers tapped against the clipboard. She could feel her heart picking up. She could see Sophie Tran in 3B, her phone held at a careful angle, streaming every second. She knew thousands of people were watching. That thought made her voice firmer than she expected. With respect, removing her will caused more disruption than letting her stay. This is not a security threat. Margaret turned slowly toward her. The look she gave was one Clara had seen given to flight attendants who never came back for their next shift. That was not a request, she said. The air between them was tight. Clara swallowed and stepped back, but she did not make the call. Margaret refocused on Alana. You have put me in a position where I have no choice. You have a choice, Alana said softly. You just do not want to make the right one. From 3B. Sophie spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying across the cabin. Just to be clear, you are threatening to remove a passenger who has a valid first-class ticket because another passenger feels uncomfortable. Margaret turned toward her. It is more complicated than that. I think it is exactly as clear as that, Sophie replied. Harold shifted in his seat, clearly irritated. Are you recording me? I am recording this entire interaction, Sophie said, and so are several other passengers. She nodded toward row 4, where 2 more phones were visible. Margaret's posture stiffened. She scanned the cabin and saw that Sophie was telling the truth. More eyes, more lenses. The tension was no longer just between her and Alana. It was stretching into every row, pulling more people into its reach. Alana kept her voice low, but it carried in the silence. You can walk away from this with your dignity intact, Margaret, or you can turn it into something you cannot take back. Margaret's jaw worked, the muscles in her face tightening. I will not be lectured on how to do my job. I am not lecturing you, Alana replied. I am reminding you that your job includes treating every passenger with respect, not just the ones you are comfortable with. Clara took a step forward. Captain Price should be informed, she said quietly. Margaret whipped around. Did you call him? Clara met her gaze. He asked me to update him if the situation escalated. Margaret's face flushed. You had no authority to. But before she could finish, the cockpit door opened. Captain Leonard Price stepped out, his presence filling the narrow aisle with a calm weight that drew every eye in the cabin. He was tall, his salt and pepper hair cropped close, his uniform immaculate. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were clear and alert. He glanced at Margaret, then at Alana, then at Harold. I understand there is some confusion about a seating assignment, he said. His tone was even, but it had the kind of authority that was not up for argument. Margaret straightened. Captain, the passenger in 1A raised a concern, and he held up a hand. Thank you, Margaret. I will take it from here. The shift was immediate. Margaret closed her mouth and stepped back, her expression tight. Captain Price turned to Alana. May I see your boarding pass? Alana handed it to him without hesitation. He read it, nodded once, and handed it back. 2A, Dr. Alana Brooks. No errors, no upgrades. This is your assigned seat. He looked to Harold. Mr. Whitman, I understand you are uncomfortable. Would you like to move to another seat? Harold blinked, as if the question itself was an insult. I have been sitting in 1A for 11 years. You are welcome to continue doing so, the captain said, but not at the expense of another passenger's dignity. The words landed in the air like a gavel. Sophie's viewers surged past 10,000. Comments poured in. Captain Price gave Alana a small nod. You are welcome to remain in your seat, Dr. Brooks, and you will not be disturbed again. Alana inclined her head. Thank you. He turned to Margaret. I would like a word in the galley. Margaret followed him stiffly toward the front, her steps precise, her back straight, her silence louder than any rebuttal. In her seat, Alana let out a slow, measured breath. She had not moved. She had not raised her voice, and yet the cabin felt changed. The air was still tense, but now it was laced with something else awareness. Clara stepped closer to her. That was brave. Alana shook her head gently. Not brave, necessary. Captain Leonard Price's presence had settled the immediate storm, but the air inside the cabin was far from calm. Margaret Doyle had retreated to the galley with the captain, her voice low and urgent behind the thin divider curtain. The sound of it carried just enough to make passengers lean slightly toward the aisle, curious about what came next. Sophie Tran adjusted her phone on her tray table, switching from a close-up view to a wider frame that captured not just Alana Brooks in 2A, but the watchful faces in nearby seats. The live-stream comments flashed so quickly she could barely read them. Words like unbelievable, stand strong, and the world is watching kept repeating. Alana sat still, her posture as composed as it had been since she boarded. She was aware of the cameras, aware of the way her face would be interpreted in clips and screenshots. She knew how quickly an image could be twisted if her expression shifted too far toward anger or even exhaustion. She had spent a career learning how to be calm under scrutiny, but there was a part of her that longed to stand up and tell the entire cabin exactly what this moment meant. Clara Ruiz moved quietly down the aisle, stopping at Sophie's row. She leaned down, her voice low. How many people are watching this? Sophie glanced up at her. 15,000, and climbing. Clara's eyes widened slightly. Does she know? Sophie shook her head. I do not think she cares about that right now. I think she cares about not moving. Clara straightened, glancing toward the front of the cabin where Margaret's shadow moved against the curtain. In 1A. Harold Whitman sat rigid, his jaw tight. He glanced occasionally at Alana, but there was less defiance in his eyes now and more something else, unease, maybe even doubt. It was the first crack in the certainty he had carried onto the plane. A man in row 4 shifted in his seat, holding his phone higher. He caught Sophie's eye and gave a faint nod. She returned it. They both knew this was no longer just about two passengers and a seating dispute. This was about everyone watching, everyone recording, everyone deciding in real time whether they were witnessing an injustice or a misunderstanding. Alana looked out the window at the still-attached jet bridge. The delay was stretching, the minutes stacking one on top of another. She knew that every moment the plane sat still was costing the airline money. That alone would get corporate attention if it had not already. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She reached for it, shielding the screen from the aisle. The name Marcus Reed lit up. She answered in a low voice. Marcus, Alana. I have been watching Sophie Tran's stream. It is everywhere already. I have calls from 2 journalists asking for statements. I do not want this to become a circus," she said. "It already is. Corporate communications at the airline knows. I can escalate this to their executive relations team right now. Just say the word." "Not yet," she replied. "I want to see if they handle this the right way on their own. Alana." His voice carried that mix of concern and disbelief she knew well. "If they lay a hand on you or try to force you off, I will make sure there are consequences before you hit the terminal." "I know you will," she said. "Let me hold my ground first." She ended the call and set the phone back in her bag. Her pulse was steady. Her mind was clear. From the galley, the curtain moved and Captain Price stepped back into the aisle. Margaret followed him, her expression unreadable now. The captain addressed the cabin in a voice that carried without force. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a short delay due to an onboard matter that is being resolved. We appreciate your patience." His eyes flicked briefly to Alana as he returned to the cockpit. It was a look that said the matter was not closed, but it was under his watch now. Margaret walked down the aisle, her gaze fixed ahead. She did not look at Alana. She moved past Harold, past Sophie, all the way to the rear of the first-class section, before turning back toward the galley. The hum of the air system returned to the foreground. Passengers began to shift again, adjusting seatbelts, glancing at their watches, whispering to one another in low tones. Sophie resumed speaking to her viewers. The captain confirmed she has the right seat, but the senior flight attendant is still not letting this go. We will see what happens next. Clara approached Alana with a small glass of water. She set it gently on the tray table. "You probably do not need this," she said softly, "but I wanted to do something." Alana looked at her, a faint warmth in her eyes. "You already did. You told the truth when it mattered." Clara gave a quick, nervous smile before stepping back. "In 1A. Harold shifted again, the movement drawing Alana's attention. He glanced her way, then looked down at his hands. It was the smallest gesture, but she could feel something in him changing. Whether it was reflection or regret, she could not tell. The man in row 4 lowered his phone briefly, checking the battery. Another passenger in row 5 quietly took his place, holding up her device like a relay in a race. Alana knew she had become the center of a widening circle. Every person in that cabin was now a potential storyteller, and every camera was an unblinking witness. The weight of that reality was not lost on her. The minutes stretched further. Still no movement from the jet bridge. Still no sign of departure. The delay was becoming noticeable enough that passengers would begin asking questions when they landed. Questions that the airline could not answer with a simple operational delay. Sophie glanced at her phone. 21,000 viewers, she whispered. Alana heard her but kept her eyes forward. She was not here for an audience. She was here for the principle that her seat was not up for debate. The ripple was spreading beyond the cabin now, into the cloud of live video feeds and social media posts that Sophie and others were broadcasting. Somewhere out there, strangers were picking sides. Somewhere out there, the story had already begun to escape the control of everyone in this room. Easy. Alana took another slow breath and thought about what it meant to hold your ground when the easier choice was to move. She thought about how many times in her life she had been told in subtle ways to step aside, to make room, to not take up too much space. Not today. The cabin curtain rustled again, and Captain Leonard Price stepped into the aisle. This time he did not simply announce a delay. He walked with measured purpose, the kind that made even the most restless passengers sit a little straighter. His uniform was crisp, his stride calm, but there was a weight in his eyes that told everyone he had come to finish this. Margaret Doyle followed 2 steps behind him, her posture tight, lips pressed together in a line that had no trace of her earlier smile. She glanced quickly at Harold Whitman in 1A before fixing her gaze on the back of the captain's jacket. Captain Price stopped beside seat 2A. He lowered himself slightly so that he and Alana Brooks were eye level. His voice was low enough to sound private, but the silence in the cabin carried it to every ear. "Dr. Brooks, I understand there have been questions about your seat." "There have," Alana replied evenly. "May I see your boarding pass again?" She handed it to him without hesitation. He studied it for a moment, then nodded. "Seat 2A. Ticket confirmed. No changes. This is your assigned place." He turned to Harold. "Mr. Whitman, you expressed some concerns earlier. Would you prefer to move to another seat?" Harold shifted in his seat, clearly caught off guard. "I have flown in 1A for over a decade. It is where I sit." The captain's voice was steady. "You are welcome to continue doing so, but not at the expense of another passenger's rights. Discomfort alone is not a valid reason to request another passenger be moved." Harold's eyes flickered, the faintest sign of irritation. He said nothing more. Captain Price faced the rest of the cabin briefly. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will continue with all passengers seated in their assigned places. We appreciate your cooperation." He straightened and looked to Margaret. "May I speak with you in the galley?" Margaret hesitated, then followed him to the front. The curtain closed behind them, but their voices, low and urgent, hummed faintly through the thin barrier. A few passengers leaned slightly forward, trying to catch fragments. In 3B, Sophie Tran angled her phone back toward Alana. Her viewers had just passed 25,000. The live chat was scrolling too fast to follow. People commenting on the captain's composure, Margaret's expression, and Alana's stillness. Alana sat with her hands resting on her lap. Outwardly, she was calm, but inside her thoughts moved quickly. She knew the captain's intervention was a turning point, but she also knew Margaret would not let go easily, the way Margaret had stood over her earlier. The way she had insisted even in the face of evidence that was not a mindset that shifted overnight. Clara Ruiz approached quietly, leaning toward Alana so only she could hear. "He is on your side," she whispered. "I could tell the moment he saw your ticket." Alana gave her a small nod. "Thank you for telling him the truth." Clara glanced toward the galley curtain. "It should have been enough when you showed your boarding pass, but some people need more than proof to change their minds." The curtain opened again. Captain Price stepped out first, followed by Margaret. His expression was still neutral, but hers had tightened even more. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said to the cabin, "we will be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." Margaret moved down the aisle, her eyes fixed ahead, avoiding Alana's gaze entirely. Sophie adjusted her phone to capture her passing. The chat on her live stream lit up with reactions. People noticed the change in Margaret's body language, the way her earlier confidence had cooled into something else, not defeat exactly, but an awareness that this was no longer hers to control. In 1A, Harold glanced at Alana again. This time there was no hostility in his eyes, only a guarded curiosity. The captain walked the length of the cabin, checking on passengers with quiet professionalism before returning to the cockpit. Clara stayed near the front, a small but visible anchor between Alana and any further trouble. Alana leaned back slightly, letting her shoulders relax just enough to release some of the tension that had been building. She did not close her eyes. She wanted to remain present, to see every move, to hold this ground until the wheels left the runway. Sophie spoke quietly into her phone for the benefit of her audience. The captain confirmed Dr. Brooks is in the right seat. He did it respectfully, without drama. Now we wait to see if that is the end of it. Alana heard her but kept her gaze out the window. The late afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long slants of gold across the tarmac. The jet bridge was still attached, but she knew it would not be for much longer. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Marcus Reed appeared on the screen. Corporate is aware. Press is circling. You holding? She typed back a short reply. Holding. She slipped the phone back into her bag and took a slow breath. Around her, the cabin was settling into a different kind of quiet. Not the tense, brittle silence from before, but something heavier, more reflective. She could feel the shift in the air, recognition, maybe even respect, from some of the people who had been watching, from the galley. Clara stepped forward to collect empty cups from a few passengers. When she reached Alana's row, she paused. Do you need anything before we take off? Alana shook her head gently. No, but thank you. Clara gave her a small, genuine smile before moving on. Sophie glanced up from her phone and met Alana's eyes for the first time since boarding. You are making a bigger impact than you realize, she said quietly. Alana tilted her head slightly. I am not here to make an impact. I am here to take my flight. Sophie smiled faintly. Sometimes that is all it takes. The curtain at the front moved again, and Captain Price's voice came over the intercom. Cabin crew, please prepare for departure. It was the first sign that the standoff was truly ending. The door would close soon. The jet bridge would pull away. Alana sat back and let the hum of the engines fill her ears. She knew this was not the last chapter. The flight might take off, but the story was already airborne. The cabin door was still open, the jet bridge still in place, but the energy in the air had shifted again. It was no longer just tension between a passenger and a crew member. Now it felt like something bigger was watching from outside the walls of the aircraft. Alana Brooks could feel it in the way Margaret Doyle kept glancing toward the galley phone. She could feel it in the way Clara Ruiz stayed near the front, not retreating to the back of the plane, as junior crew usually did before takeoff. And she could feel it most of all in the sudden, quiet buzz of her phone in her bag. She slid it out discreetly. A new message from Marcus Reed lit up the screen. Marcus Corporate Comms is in a meeting right now. You are the only item on the agenda. They are watching Sophie's live feed. Her reply was short. Let me know if they act. Marcus, they will. The CEO's assistant is in the room. Alana looked up and scanned the cabin. Sophie Tran was still streaming from 3B. Her phone angled slightly toward Alana, but wide enough to capture the movement in the aisle. The viewer count in the corner of the screen was now over 30,000. In 1A, Harold Whitman shifted uncomfortably. He was not talking anymore, just staring out the window like a man wishing he had stayed home. His earlier certainty had softened into something more complicated. Margaret moved past him, heading toward the cockpit. She disappeared behind the curtain, and moments later the muffled sound of her voice drifted back. She was on the interphone. Clara stepped into the aisle and approached Alana's seat. She is talking to corporate, she said quietly. I assumed she would. Alana replied, They called her, Clara added. Not the other way around. Alana's brows lifted slightly. That was the part that mattered. If corporate was calling down to the cabin, it meant the story had climbed too high to ignore. Margaret reappeared, her expression flat but her movements sharper, more mechanical. She picked up an empty glass from a nearby seat without looking at the passenger. She was rattled, and Alana could see it in the set of her shoulders. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus had sent another message. Marcus, they just told the captain to resolve without removing you. Their exact words: de-escalate. Step back. Keep the cameras off us. Alana read it twice before slipping the phone away. She knew this was a shift in the balance, but she also knew Margaret would not like it. The curtain opened, and Captain Leonard Price stepped back into the aisle. He stopped by Margaret first. "We are not removing anyone," he said plainly. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Captain, with all due respect," he did not raise his voice. "This conversation is not about respect. It is about instruction. We will depart with all passengers in their assigned seats." Margaret glanced toward Alana, then back to the captain. "She is not the only one being watched," she said quietly, almost like a warning. "I am aware," the captain replied, "which is why this ends here." Margaret said nothing more, but her silence was not agreement. The captain walked down the aisle to check the rows again. When he reached Alana, he gave a small nod, a silent confirmation that she would not be touched. Alana inclined her head in return. "Thank you, Captain." He moved on without another word. Clara came forward a moment later with a fresh bottle of water. She placed it gently on Alana's tray. "You do not have to drink it," she said, "but I thought you might want something new to hold." Alana smiled faintly. "Sometimes that is enough." From behind, Sophie's voice carried, "They are not going to admit it on camera, but corporate just got involved. I have 3 different sources messaging me, the same thing." The chat on her live feed exploded. People were tagging news outlets, public figures, even the airline's official account. Comments rolled past like a river support for Alana, calls for the airline to apologize, reminders of other incidents caught on video. Harold shifted again, finally looking at Alana. "This is going to blow up," he said quietly. "It already has," she replied. He looked down at his hands. "I was wrong to assume." Alana studied him for a moment. "It matters that you can say that, but it matters more what you do after." He gave a short nod, the kind that belonged more to acknowledgement than to apology. At the front, Margaret leaned against the jump seat, her eyes scanning the cabin like a security camera. Her face was unreadable, but the stiffness in her posture spoke louder than any expression. Alana could feel the change in the air now. It was not victory. It was something quieter, inevitability. The course of the flight had been set not by departure schedules, but by the weight of witnesses. Her phone buzzed once more. "Marcus again?" "Marcus Press is ready. If you want statements, I will coordinate." "Not yet," she typed. "This is still happening." She slipped the phone back into her bag and looked out the window. The ground crew was moving with more urgency now. The jet bridge would be pulling away soon. Sophie adjusted her seatbelt, still streaming. "I think we are actually going to leave now," she said to her viewers. "But remember, this story does not end when the plane takes off." Alana glanced at her and saw the truth in that. The plane would leave the ground, but the ripple was already too wide to contain. The engines were still silent, the hum of the air system steady. But the atmosphere inside the first-class cabin had begun to change. It was not the quick release of tension that came after a resolved disagreement. This was slower, heavier, as if the people seated here were starting to understand they had been part of something they could not unsee. Clara Ruiz stood just a few feet from Dr. Alana Brooks, manifest still in her hand. Her gaze moved from the captain, who was speaking quietly near the cockpit. to Margaret Doyle, who remained in the jump seat at the front. Margaret's eyes were fixed forward, her posture perfect, but Clara could see the rigid set of her shoulders. Clara's heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. She had promised herself when she took this job that she would follow procedure, keep her head down, and earn her place on the crew. Yet the longer she stood here, the more that promise felt like it had been written for someone else. She looked at Alana again. The woman had not raised her voice, had not moved from her seat, and yet the balance of this entire cabin had shifted around her. Sophie Tran's camera captured the moment when Clara took a small step forward, breaking the invisible line that separated her from the passengers. She crouched slightly beside Alana's seat so her voice would not carry. "I am not going to pretend I have seen something like this before," she said quietly. "But I know what is happening here is wrong." Alana met her eyes. "Knowing it is wrong is the first step." She replied, "Speaking it is the second." Clara hesitated for only a heartbeat. Then she straightened, turned toward Margaret, and said clearly enough for the nearby rows to hear. Removing her would be the real disruption, not letting her stay. Margaret's head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Ruiz, that is not your call. With respect, it is my call if it concerns the safety and order of the cabin," Clara said, her voice steady. The people in rows 2 and 3 shifted in their seats, sensing that something irreversible had just been spoken aloud. Even Harold Whitman in 1A glanced at Clara with a look that was part surprise, part grudging respect. Sophie's live feed exploded with comments. Viewers were typing Clara's name over and over, calling her brave, telling her to stand her ground. Margaret rose from the jump seat and walked toward Clara until they were standing less than a foot apart. "You are on probation," she said, her tone low but laced with warning. "Do you want this to be the reason it ends?" Clara did not step back. "I want this flight to leave without removing a woman who has done nothing wrong." The silence that followed was the kind that crackles in the air before a storm. Captain Leonard Price stepped into the aisle before Margaret could respond. "Everything all right here?" His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the weight in it. Margaret straightened. "I was reminding Ruiz of her position." "She knows her position," the captain said evenly. "She also knows the policy. And the policy says a confirmed passenger remains in their seat unless there is a valid security concern." Margaret pressed her lips together, then gave a short nod. The captain turned to Clara. "Thank you for your professionalism." Clara inclined her head, her pulse still pounding. She stepped back but did not retreat to the galley. Alana sat quietly through all of it, but inside, she felt a flicker of something rare. She had been in rooms where people whispered their agreement later, in private, when the moment had already passed. She had seen colleagues avoid eye contact to keep their comfort intact. But here, in the middle of this narrow aisle, a young woman had stepped forward in real time, knowing the risk. In 3B, Sophie tilted her phone to capture the expressions around the cabin. She knew her audience could feel the shift too. The feed's comments section was full of people saying the same thing the power in the room had moved. Harold leaned forward slightly, looking at Alana. "I should not have made the comment I did earlier," he said. It was not loud enough for everyone to hear, but Sophie's camera picked up the words. "I thought I was protecting myself. I was just holding on to a bad memory and putting it on you." Alana looked at him for a long moment. "It matters that you see it now," she said. "What you do with that awareness matters more." He gave a short nod, the kind that admitted there was more to think about. At the front of the cabin, Margaret returned to the jump seat and faced forward. Her body was still, but her mind was working. Alana could see it in the way she clasped her hands a little too tightly. The captain moved down the aisle, checking seat belts and speaking briefly to passengers. When he reached Sophie's row, he glanced at the phone in her hand, but said nothing. He knew by now there was no putting this back in the box. Clara lingered near the curtain, keeping her eyes on Margaret but also scanning the rest of the cabin. Every now and then her gaze returned to Alana, and the corners of her mouth would lift just slightly, a quiet acknowledgement. Sophie ended her commentary for a moment and let the camera simply record the stillness. Her viewers were now over 35,000, and more were joining by the minute. The chat was relentless. People were naming the airline, calling for accountability, sharing the stream to their own followers. Alana could feel the weight of it all pressing in, but she did not let it change her posture. She stayed, as she had from the beginning, upright, composed, unshaken. She had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful statement is refusing to leave the space you have earned. The engines remained quiet, but the story had already taken flight. The sound of the cockpit door opening broke the strange stillness in the cabin. Captain Leonard Price stepped out once again, but this time his expression was different. The calm professionalism was still there, but beneath it was something heavier, a decision already made. Margaret Doyle looked up immediately, searching his face for a signal. She did not get one. He walked straight past her to stand in the center of the aisle between first class and the rest of the plane. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of authority that left no room for misunderstanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this flight will not be departing on schedule. At the instruction of headquarters, we are holding our position until further notice." The murmur started instantly. Passengers leaned toward one another, some frowning, some pulling out their phones. In 3B, Sophie Tran lifted her camera higher. Her viewers had just passed 40,000. Margaret's head turned sharply toward the captain. "Leonard, you cannot ground a plane over a seating dispute." "This is not about a seating dispute," Captain Price replied, his tone still calm, but his words precise. "This is about the safety and integrity of the operation. Corporate has reviewed the situation and determined it requires immediate intervention before departure." Margaret took a step closer to him. "And what exactly does that mean?" "It means," he said, meeting her eyes, "that they are watching, and they want this flight to remain at the gate until they say otherwise." A ripple of surprise moved through the cabin. Passengers who had been silent until now began whispering to each other. Some sounded frustrated, others curious. Harold Whitman in 1A shifted uncomfortably, then looked at Alana Brooks. "This is because of what happened, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Alana did not flinch. "This is because what happened was seen," she answered. Clara Ruiz stood near the galley, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked between the captain and Alana, knowing this was a moment neither of them could control any more. This was bigger than one cabin, bigger than one flight. Sophie's voice carried softly from her seat as she narrated for her audience. "The captain just announced the plane is being held. They are not saying how long. My viewers are telling me the airline's name is already trending." Margaret's eyes darted toward Sophie, but she said nothing. Alana kept her posture straight, her breathing slow. Inside, she felt the familiar current of control moving away from individuals and toward the system itself. Marcus Reed had once called it the tipping point, the moment when a personal experience becomes a public reckoning. Her phone vibrated. She slid it from her bag and glanced at the screen. Marcus Media is outside the terminal. They are waiting. The story is broken wide. She typed back one word. Understood. Captain Price moved closer to Alana's seat. Dr. Brooks, you should be aware that headquarters has asked me to keep the cabin stable while they address the matter directly. Stable is good, she said quietly. It is overdue. The captain gave the smallest nod before stepping away. Margaret was clearly struggling to keep her composure. She walked briskly to the galley phone, spoke into it for a moment, then replaced it with more force than necessary. She scanned the cabin again, her gaze lingering on Alana for just a second longer than it should have. Clara caught that look and felt her stomach tighten. She stepped a little closer to Alana's row, a subtle signal that did not need explanation. From her seat. Sophie turned the camera toward Margaret briefly, then back to Alana. People in my chat are saying they have seen this before, she murmured to her viewers. Not this exact situation, but the same pattern. Someone is told they do not belong, and then the truth comes out for everyone to see. The longer the plane sat still, the more the atmosphere shifted. The early irritation from some passengers began to fade into a quieter attentiveness. They were starting to realize they were not just delayed travelers. They were witnesses to something that would follow them long after this flight ended. Harold cleared his throat. Do you think they are going to make an example out of this? Alana turned her head toward him. They do not have to make one, she said. It is already here. In the back of the cabin, a voice called forward to ask if passengers could deplane if they wished. Captain Price stepped forward again to explain that anyone who wanted to leave could do so, but they would not be reboarded until the matter was resolved. Only a few people stood, and they did so slowly, their eyes flicking toward Alana as they passed. Sophie's feed caught every movement. She barely spoke now, letting the scene tell itself. Her chat was a blur of comments, people demanding policy changes, others sharing their own experiences, some even calling for a boycott of the airline. Alana sat with her hands resting lightly on the armrests, her gaze fixed on the aisle ahead. She had not asked for the plane to be grounded. She had not called for any public action. Yet she knew the decision would be read as hers in the eyes of many. She was prepared for that. Clara returned from the galley with a fresh pot of coffee, offering it to passengers who remained seated. When she reached Alana, she paused. You are not alone in this, she said softly. I know, Alana replied. That is why it matters. Margaret passed by again, her steps clipped, her face unreadable. If she felt the weight of corporate eyes on her now, she did not show it. But Alana saw the way her hands tightened briefly at her sides. The captain made another announcement. We have been instructed to hold for further communication from headquarters. I will update you as soon as possible. Thank you for your patience. He returned to the cockpit, leaving the cabin in a suspended quiet. Alana looked toward the window. The sky beyond the terminal glass was shifting from afternoon gold to the cooler tones of early evening. It was a reminder that time was passing, even if the plane was not. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus' decision coming soon. It will not be small. She placed the phone face down on the tray table and sat back. Whatever the decision was, she would meet it the same way she had met every moment so far, without moving from the seat that was hers. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the sun dipped lower outside the terminal windows. The air inside felt thick, not from the temperature, but from the weight of waiting. Every sound seemed louder, the quiet hum of the ventilation, the soft clink of ice in a glass. the muted tapping of fingers against phone screens. "Doctor?" Alana Brooks kept her eyes forward. She knew from years of navigating political and corporate battles that the silence before a decision was never empty. It was the moment when power was being measured and lines were being drawn. The cockpit door opened again. Captain Leonard Price stepped out, his expression steady but his movements quicker than before. He was holding a folded slip of paper. He stopped beside Margaret Doyle, who was still in the jump seat, and handed it to her. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the short-printed message. Margaret's lips tightened. She glanced up at him. "They are serious about this." "They are," the captain replied. Margaret's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You know what this will mean." "Yes," he said simply. Margaret stood and walked toward the galley phone. Her steps were sharp, each one a signal that she was not in agreement, but would follow the order. She pressed the receiver to her ear, speaking quietly to someone on the other end. Clara Ruiz watched her from a few feet away, trying to read her face. The captain moved down the aisle until he reached Alana's seat. He leaned slightly toward her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Dr. Brooks' headquarters has issued a directive. This flight will not be departing tonight. We have been ordered to deplane all passengers." Alana absorbed the words without a flicker of surprise. "I understand. They are sending a senior operations team to meet the aircraft," he added. "Security will be here as well. Not to remove you, to escort you to a private area." Alana gave a small nod. "Thank you for telling me directly." From her seat in 3B, Sophie Tran was still streaming. She could not hear the captain's words, but she noticed the shift in his tone and the subtle movement of his body. Her chat was a flood of speculation. Viewers were convinced something big had just been decided. Margaret ended her phone call and stepped into the aisle. Her voice was professional but stiff. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? Per instructions from our Corporate Operations Center, this flight will be canceled for tonight. Please collect your belongings. You will be met at the gate by airline staff for rebooking." The reaction was immediate. Some passengers groaned in frustration. Others began firing off texts or emails. A few simply sat frozen for a moment before reaching for their bags. Harold Whitman turned toward Alana. "They are doing this because of you," he said, his tone not accusatory, but almost curious. Alana met his gaze. "They are doing this because of what happened, and because people are watching." Clara approached Alana's seat as passengers began to rise. "I can help you with your bag," she offered. "I have it," Alana replied, lifting her carry-on from under the seat. Margaret moved briskly through the aisle, directing passengers toward the exit. She avoided making eye contact with Alana, but the tension in her movements betrayed her awareness that this moment would not fade quietly. At the front of the cabin, Captain Price stood near the door, greeting each passenger as they stepped off. Some looked confused, some irritated, but a few paused to glance back at Alana before leaving, as if silently acknowledging her presence in what had just unfolded. Sophie was among the last to stand. She kept her phone raised, recording everything. To everyone watching, she said to her viewers, "Remember what you have seen here tonight. This is why we record. This is why we speak up." Clara stayed close to Alana as they moved toward the door. The jet bridge beyond was lit with the yellow glow of overhead lights. At the far end, Alana could see a small group waiting, 2 men in dark suits with airline badges, a woman in a navy blazer, and 2 uniformed security officers. Marcus Reed's voice came through her phone via a quick message. "Operations team is ready. Press is at the concourse. Do you want coverage? Not yet, she typed back. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the murmurs of other passengers faded behind her. The operations team leader, a tall man with a clipped tone, greeted her with a formal nod. Dr. Brooks, we have a private lounge prepared. You will be escorted there now. Alana glanced briefly at the security officers. I appreciate the escort, she said evenly, but I am not here to hide. The man's eyes flickered for a moment, as if unused to such a direct response. Understood. We will proceed as planned. Clara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning back toward the aircraft. She would have to remain with the crew, but her expression said enough she understood this was only the beginning. As Alana walked down the concourse with the operations team, she could hear the faint echo of footsteps and the distant murmur of voices. She knew some of them belonged to reporters. Marcus would be managing that part, ensuring the first word spoken publicly came on her terms. When they reached the private lounge, the door closed softly behind her. The room was quiet, furnished in muted tones, with a large window overlooking the tarmac. She set her bag down and stood for a moment, watching the plane that had carried so much weight tonight sit motionless under the floodlights. Her phone buzzed again. Marcus Media window in 20 minutes if you are ready. She took a slow breath. Ready. Outside the glass. Ground crew moved around the aircraft, their reflective vests catching the light. It was strange, she thought, how a single sequence of choices inside that cabin had now halted an entire operation. She knew this was not the end. It was the threshold. The real confrontation was about to begin, and it would not take place in the narrow aisle of a first-class cabin, but in rooms where decisions shaped futures. The door to the private lounge opened quietly, and Dr. Alana Brooks stepped inside with Marcus Reed at her side. The room was softly lit, a sharp contrast to the harsh floodlights illuminating the tarmac outside. Reporters were already waiting, their cameras pointed and microphones poised, ready for the story that had captured a nation's attention. Alana took a slow breath, steadying herself. She knew this moment was inevitable, but that did not make it easier. Years of careful preparation and composure had led here to a room full of questions and a spotlight that she had never sought but now fully owned. Marcus gave her a small nod of encouragement. You ready? She smiled faintly. Let's tell the truth. The media swarm surged forward as she took her place behind the podium. The flashing lights were overwhelming, but her voice was calm and clear as she addressed the crowd. Good evening. My name is Dr. Alana Brooks. I am here to share my experience on Flight 682 and to speak on behalf of all those who have been made to feel they do not belong simply because of who they are. She paused, letting the words sink in. Cameras clicked rapidly. Microphones leaned closer. This incident was not about a seat. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist without fear of discrimination. I was removed from my rightful seat, not because of any mistake or misconduct, but because of bias that persists even in places where it should have no place. Questions came quickly, voices overlapping. Alana answered with the same measured calm, explaining the sequence of events, the confrontation with the senior flight attendant, and the intervention of Captain Leonard Price. She spoke of the growing importance of witness and accountability in an age where technology captures moments that would otherwise be ignored. She praised Clara Ruiz, the junior flight attendant who had shown courage by standing up quietly in the cabin, and acknowledged the role of Sophie Tran's live stream in bringing light to the situation. When asked about her next steps, Alana was clear. This is not just about one flight. It is about systemic change. I will be working with the airline and advocacy groups to ensure this does not happen to anyone else." The press conference stretched on, but Alana's voice never wavered. Behind the cameras, Marcus managed the flow, ensuring key points were emphasized and the narrative remained focused on dignity and justice. Meanwhile, across town, the airline's corporate offices were in chaos. Margaret Doyle was summoned to a meeting with human resources and legal counsel. The weight of the incident pressed heavily on her. She had been confident once, certain she was following protocol, but now the world had seen the confrontation unfold. Her superiors questioned her actions and decisions, pushing for explanations about why she had escalated the situation despite clear evidence of the passenger's right to her seat. Margaret's responses were measured but defensive. She insisted she acted out of concern for safety and order, but it was clear her position was tenuous. Internal investigations had begun, and her future with the airline was uncertain. Back at the airport lounge, Sophie Tran's livestream had reached over 1 million views. Clips from the flight were shared across social media platforms, sparking widespread discussion about race, power, and the airline industry's culture. Support poured in for Dr. Brooks from all corners: civil rights leaders, politicians, everyday people who had experienced similar moments of exclusion and injustice. Hashtags calling for reform trended nationally. Alana read the messages quietly, her heart swelling with a mixture of exhaustion and hope. She had not asked to become a symbol, but she understood the responsibility that came with the visibility. As the night deepened, Marcus leaned in close. "You've started something important." Alana looked up, her eyes reflecting both fatigue and fierce determination. "It's just the beginning." The early morning light filtered softly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference hall where Dr. Alana Brooks prepared to deliver her keynote speech. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, but beneath the excitement was something deeper, a quiet undercurrent of change sparked by events that had unfolded just days before on Flight 682. Alana adjusted the lapel of her blazer and took a steadying breath. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, but nothing compared to standing here, knowing the weight of what she carried with her, not just her own story, but the stories of countless others who had ever been made to feel invisible, unworthy, or displaced. Her phone vibrated quietly on the podium. A message from Marcus read: "The airline just announced new anti-discrimination policies. You made them act." She allowed herself a small smile. The journey had been long and fraught with moments of doubt. But this was progress. The crowd quieted as she stepped to the microphone. Her voice was calm but unwavering, carrying through the room with clarity. "Thank you for welcoming me today. I stand before you not only as an advocate for financial reform, but as someone who has recently experienced firsthand the persistence of bias in places where it should never exist, in the skies above us." She paused, letting her words settle. "When I boarded Flight 682, I did so with the expectation that my ticket, my credentials, and my presence would be respected. Instead, I was challenged, questioned, and ultimately stood up for not just a seat, but my dignity." A ripple of understanding passed through the audience. "This experience taught me many things. It taught me about resilience, about the power of quiet strength, and about the importance of witnesses, those who see injustice and choose not to look away." Her gaze swept across the room, meeting eyes and hearts alike. "But it also taught me that change is not automatic. It requires action. It demands accountability, and it calls for the courage to sit firmly in the face of discomfort, to refuse to be moved when you belong." The applause was gentle but genuine. Later, As she stepped down from the stage, reporters and advocates approached her, eager to hear more. Alana answered their questions with the same measured calm that had carried her through the flight and beyond. Backstage, Marcus awaited, holding a folder with the airline's newly drafted equity and inclusion plan, a direct result of the incident that had captured national attention. "You've started something that will last," he said. "This is the beginning of a new flight path." Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware that the skies had already shifted. Meanwhile, news reports circulated about Margaret Doyle's suspension, pending a full investigation into the incident. Airline executives issued public apologies, promising to review training and policies to prevent future occurrences in quieter moments. Alana reflected on the young flight attendant, Clara Ruiz, whose small act of courage had rippled out far beyond the cabin aisle. A message from Clara appeared on Alana's phone. "Thank you for showing me what it means to stand." Alana replied simply, "We stand together." Days later, Alana found herself seated once more on a plane, not in first class this time, but somewhere between the bustle of coach and the quiet of the cabin. She watched the clouds drift beneath her, fields of silence and possibility stretching endlessly. She thought of the flight, the confrontation, and the unyielding calm that had defined her response. It had not been loud. It had not been angry. It had simply been firm, a refusal to vanish. And sometimes, she knew, that was all it took. As the plane descended toward a new city and a new chapter, Alana closed her eyes briefly. She carried with her a truth as steady as the wings beneath her presence, is power. And power can change the world. Doctor? Alana Brooks didn't shout. She didn't cause a scene. She simply stayed seated firmly, calmly, and with a dignity that spoke louder than any words. Her refusal to be moved was not just a defense of a seat, but a powerful stand against the everyday discrimination so many face in silence. This story reminds us how deep bias can run and how courage can come in quiet forms. It calls us to reflect to see how presence alone can challenge systems built on exclusion, and how each one of us has a role to play in shaping a world where everyone belongs. Discrimination, no matter where it happens, whether at 36,000 feet in the sky or in the moments we meet every day, must be called out and changed. Alana's story is a beacon of hope, a call for respect, and a challenge to all of us to choose empathy over fear. If this story moved you, if it made you think or feel something real, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine light on truth and inspire change. Thank you for being part of this journey. Stay with us because the fight for justice and dignity continues, and together, our voices are stronger than ever.